Loreto had grown up in the heart of Lesotho, a village wrapped in the deep traditions and customs of their ancestors. Life in the village was slow-paced, and everyone knew each other's stories. Or at least, they thought they did. For as long as he could remember, Loreto had heard whispers about his mother, Mama Khali. They said she wasn't just an ordinary woman. Some said she had powers, others said she was dangerous. But Loreto had always shrugged it off, thinking it was nothing more than village gossip. After all, what some would believe his mother, the same woman who raised him with love and care, could be a witch. But recently, the whispers had grown louder. Every time something strange happened in the village, whether it was the crops dying unexpectedly or someone falling ill, people started to look in Mama Khali's direction. Loreto had noticed the sideways glances, the way the elders murmured to one another when she passed. The villagers were afraid, but Loreto didn't understand why. His mother was quiet, hardworking, and had never hurt anyone, at least not that he knew of. Yet, the air was thick with suspicion, and it was only a matter of time before something more than whispers would come knocking at their door. As Loreto grew older, he began to notice things about Mama Khali that, in retrospect, seemed out of the ordinary. She always knew when he was in trouble, even when he hadn't told her. As a child, he would climb trees he wasn't supposed to, or venture into the forbidden parts of the forest. No matter how far away he was, his mother would always appear at just the right time to bring him back home, safe and sound. When he asked how she knew, she would smile mysteriously and say, "A mother always knows." But it wasn't just her instincts that stood out. Mama Khali had a way with nature. Their small farm always seemed to flourish even when the rest of the village struggled. Crops that failed for others thrived under her care. The village elders had always been the keepers of order in Lesotho, revered for their wisdom and guidance. But as the fear of witchcraft gripped the village, the elders found themselves under pressure to take action. One evening, they summoned Mama Khali to stand before them. Loreto watched anxiously as his mother, calm and composed, stood before the council of old men, who stared at her with suspicion. Chief Libwa, the head elder, spoke first, his voice heavy with authority. "Khali, we have heard troubling rumors about you. The village believes that you are responsible for the missing children." Mama Khali did not flinch. She made the accusations with a quiet strength that made Loreto proud, though he could see the pain in her eyes. "I have lived among you all my life. I have healed your sick and cared for your children. Yet, now, because of fear, you turn against me," she said, her voice steady. The elders exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with her calm response. But Chief Libwa pressed on, demanding that she prove her innocence. "If you are not responsible for these disappearances, then help us find the children," he said. Mama Khali nodded slowly, but Loreto knew this was not a simple task. The village's growing hysteria threatened to turn any investigation into a witch hunt, and Loreto feared that no matter what his mother did, they would find a way to blame her. After the meeting with the elders, Mama Khali decided to take matters into her own hands. She had always been connected to the land, and she believed that the answers to the missing children could be found in the forest. She told Loreto about a place she had never shown him before, a hidden grove deep within the woods, a place where the ancestor spirits were said to linger. Loreto was hesitant. He had grown up hearing stories about the dangers of venturing too far into the forest, but Mama Khali seemed certain that they would find the truth there. As they made their way through the dense trees, Loreto couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of the leaves made him jump. Finally, they reached the grove, a peaceful clearing surrounded by ancient trees. In the center was a large stone altar, covered in moss. Mama Khali knelt beside the altar and closed her eyes, her hands resting on the cool stone. "The ancestors speak to those who listen," she whispered. Loreto watched as his mother seemed to enter a trance, her body swaying gently as she murmured in a language he didn't understand. Moments later, her eyes snapped open. "We are not alone," she said quietly. "There is a dark presence here, something that has been hiding in the shadows for a long time." The days after their visit to the hidden grove were filled with a strange, restless energy. Loreto could feel it in the air, like they come before a storm. Then, without warning, something miraculous happened. The missing children began to return. One by one, they appeared at the edge of the village, dazed but unharmed. The villagers were overjoyed, rushing to embrace their sons and daughters, but their joy was tempered by fear. None of the children could remember where they had been or how they had disappeared in the first place. Their memories were blank, as if they had been in a deep sleep. While the return of the children should have been a cause for celebration, the villagers remained uneasy. Whispers of dark magic continued to circulate, and some even claimed that Mama Khali had used her powers to bring the children back only to cover up her own involvement in their disappearance. Loreto was furious at these baseless accusations, but he knew there was little he could do to change the minds of those who had already decided his mother was guilty. Mama Khali, however, remained calm. She knew that the truth would come out eventually, and she was willing to wait. But Loreto wondered how long they had before the village turned against them completely. Despite the children's safe return, something still felt wrong. Loreto could sense it in the way the trees seemed to whisper at night, and in the strange shadows that flickered at the edge of his vision. He began to have nightmares, dark dreams filled with shadowy figures and distant, echoing voices. In every dream, there was one constant, the presence of a figure, cloaked in darkness, watching him from afar. When he told his mother about the dreams, her face grew serious. "The ancestors are trying to tell you something," she said. "We must be vigilant. The danger is not over." That evening, Mama Khali decided to perform a cleansing ritual. She believed that the dark presence they had sensed in the hidden grove was still lurking nearby, and she needed to rid their home of its influence. Loreto helped her prepare, gathering herbs and lighting candles as she chanted prayers to the ancestors. The air inside their house grew thick with the scent of burning sage, and the flickering candlelight cast strange shadows on the walls. As the ritual reached its peak, a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the flames in an instant. Mama Khali gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "He's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The spirit, he's found us." The next morning, Mama Khali was visibly shaken. She had always been a pillar of strength, but after the previous night's encounter, Loreto could see that something had deeply unsettled her. "The ancestors are warning us," she said quietly as they sat together outside their home. "There is a force at work here that is older than anything I have ever felt. It's not just about the missing children. There is something much darker at play." Loreto frowned, trying to make sense of his mother's words. What could be darker than the disappearance of innocent children? Mama Khali explained that the ancestors had shown her visions during the ritual. In the visions, she saw the village being consumed by a shadow, a darkness that crept over the land like a storm. The source of this darkness was unclear, but Mama Khali had a feeling that it was connected to the recent events in the village. "We must find a way to stop it before it's too late," she said. But how could they fight something they didn't fully understand? Loreto felt a surge of frustration. He wanted to protect his mother, to help her stop whatever was coming, but he didn't know where to begin. Loreto wasn't the only one troubled by recent events. Chief Libua, the head elder, had been acting strangely ever since the children returned. He was more withdrawn than usual, and his normally commanding presence seemed diminished. Loreto had noticed that the chief's hands trembled whenever he spoke about the disappearances, and there was a strange look in his eyes, something like guilt. Loreto couldn't shake the feeling that Chief Libua was hiding something, but what could it be? One evening, Loreto overheard a conversation between the chief and one of the other elders. They were speaking in hushed tones, but Loreto managed to catch a few words. "We mustn't let the others find out," the chief whispered urgently. "If they knew the truth, they would turn against us." Loreto's heart raced as he realized what this meant. The elders were hiding something that could explain everything that had been happening in the village. But how could he uncover the truth without putting himself and his mother in even more danger? Loreto knew he had to act fast, but one wrong move could cost him everything. As Loreto wrestled with the possibility that the village elders were hiding something, Mama Khali began to search for answers in a different direction. She had long studied the old ways, the ancient rituals that the people of Lesotho had forgotten over time. One night, after days of restless contemplation, she came to Loreto with a revelation. "There is a forgotten ritual," she said, her voice heavy with importance. "It is older than any magic the village knows today, a ritual that calls upon the spirits of the ancestors to reveal hidden truths." Loreto was both curious and cautious. "Why haven't we used it before?" he asked. Mama Khali hesitated before answering. "It is dangerous," she admitted. "This ritual requires a sacrifice, something precious. And once it is performed, there is no going back. The spirits will demand their price, and if we are not careful, the cost may be too high." Loreto felt a chill at her words. He trusted his mother, but the idea of dealing with forces beyond their control was terrifying. However, he knew that they were running out of options. The darkness in the village was growing stronger, and the truth about Chief Libua and the elders seemed further out of reach. In the end, Loreto agreed to help his mother prepare for the ritual. The night of the ritual arrived, marked by an eerie celestial event, a blood moon that bathed the village in an ominous red glow. Loreto couldn't shake the feeling that the moon was watching them, its crimson light casting long, distorted shadows across the land. Mama Khali had chosen the hidden grove as the location for the ritual. It was the only place where she felt connected enough to the ancestral spirits to attempt such a powerful ceremony. They arrived at the grove just after sunset. Mama Khali instructed Loreto to light a circle of candles around the ancient stone altar, the same altar they had visited weeks earlier. The air was thick with anticipation as his mother began to chant, her voice rising and falling in rhythmic, ancient syllables. Loreto watched, mesmerized, as the candles flickered in response to her words. Soon, the ground beneath them seemed to hum with energy, and a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing. Loreto's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that something was happening, something real. As Mama Khali continued the ritual, the spirits responded. Their whispers echoed through the trees, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Then, without warning, the wind stopped, and everything felt deathly silent. Mama Khali looked up, her eyes glowing with a strange light. "They have spoken," she said quietly. "We must be ready for what is to come." The morning after the ritual, Loreto and his mother returned to the village, but something was different. The air was thick with tension, and the villagers eyed Mama Khali with suspicion. Word of the blood moon and the strange happenings in the grove had spread quickly, and many believed that she had called upon dark forces for her own gain. Chief Libua, in particular, seemed eager to fuel these fears. He addressed the village, accusing Mama Khali of witchcraft once again and claiming that her actions were putting everyone in danger. Loreto was furious. He knew that the chief was hiding something, and it was becoming clear that he would do anything to deflect attention from his own secrets. But Mama Khali remained calm. She had expected this reaction and had prepared for it. She told Loreto to be patient, that the truth would reveal itself soon enough. However, as the days passed, tensions in the village grew worse. The people who had once come to Mama Khali for healing now avoided her, whispering behind her back and casting accusatory glances in her direction. One evening, Loreto overheard a conversation between Chief Libua and another elder. They were plotting to bring the village together and accuse Mama Khali in front of everyone. It would be a public trial, and they planned to ensure that the outcome was in their favor. Loreto's blood ran cold. He knew they had to act quickly before it was too late. As the day of the public trial drew near, Loreto and his mother prepared for what was coming. Mama Khali was certain that the elders would demand proof of her innocence, but she also knew that no matter what she did, they would twist it against her. In Lesotho, there was an ancient test used to determine whether someone was a witch, the test of fire. The accused would be asked to walk across a bed of hot coals. If they emerged unharmed, they were declared innocent. If they burned, it was seen as proof of their guilt. Loreto couldn't believe that his mother would be subjected to such a barbaric ritual, but Mama Khali remained resolute. She knew the dangers of the test of fire, but she also believed in the power of the ancestors. "I am not afraid," She told Loreto, her eyes filled with determination. "I have walked this path for a reason. The ancestors will guide me." The night of the trial arrived, and the entire village gathered in the central square. A large fire had been built, and the hot coals glowed ominously in the darkness. Loreto stood by his mother's side, his heart pounding in his chest. Chief Libua stood before the crowd, his voice ringing out as he declared the start of the trial. "Khali, you stand accused of witchcraft. If you are innocent, the fire will spare you. If you are guilty, you will burn." Without hesitation, Mama Khali stepped forward. The crowd watched in silence as she approached the bed of coals. Loreto held his breath, praying that the ancestors would protect her. As she walked across the burning embers, the village gasped in shock. Her feet did not burn. She emerged from the other side unscathed, her head held high. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Chief Libua's voice rang out again. "This proves nothing," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "She has used dark magic to protect herself." But the crowd was not convinced. They had seen the truth with their own eyes, and for the first time, doubt began to creep into their hearts. The test of fire had shaken the village's faith in Chief Libua, but he was not ready to give up his power so easily. He continued to spread rumors about Mama Khali, insisting that she had used her witchcraft to deceive them all. However, his once strong grip on the village was beginning to slip. People who had once followed him without question now whispered among themselves, wondering whether the chief had been lying to them all along. Loreto knew that the time had come to expose the chief's secrets. He remembered the conversation he had overheard between Olowokora and the other elder, the one where they had spoken about hiding the truth. With Mama Khali's guidance, Loreto began to investigate further. He quietly spoke to villagers who had known the chief for years, gathering pieces of information that painted a darker picture of the man who had ruled over them for so long. Finally, Loreto uncovered the truth. Chief Libua had been involved in a terrible crime years ago, one that had been covered up to protect his reputation. The missing children had not been taken by witchcraft, as everyone believed. Instead, they had been part of a corrupt plan orchestrated by Olowokora and a few of his closest allies to exploit the village's fears for their own gain. Armed with this knowledge, Loreto and Mama Khali prepared to confront the chief and reveal his treachery to the entire village. The day of reckoning had arrived. Loreto and Mama Khali gathered the villagers in the central square, the same place where the test of fire had taken place. Chief Libua stood at the front, his face calm but his eyes betraying a flicker of fear. Loreto stepped forward, his voice steady as he recounted everything he had learned about the chief's crimes. He spoke of the missing children, of the elders' secret meetings, and of Olowokora's plan to use the fear of witchcraft to control the village. At first, the crowd was silent. But as Loreto continued to speak, anger began to ripple through the villagers. They had been deceived for too long, and now the truth was finally out. One by one, people began to turn on the chief, demanding that he answer for his actions. Chief Libua tried to deny everything, but it was too late. The villagers no longer believed his lies. In a matter of minutes, the man who had once held so much power found himself surrounded by a furious mob. Mama Khali watched in silence as the people took justice into their own hands. She had always known that the truth would come out eventually, but the cost had been high. As the crowd dragged Chief Libua away, Loreto felt a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in months, the weight of fear had been lifted from the village. But he also knew that this was not the end. There were still dark forces at play, and the battle was far from over. In the days following Chief Libua's downfall, the village of Lesotho was eerily quiet. People were still processing the shocking revelations about their once revered leader, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Loreto and Mama Khali had expected a sense of relief to wash over the village, but instead, they found themselves in the midst of confusion. While many villagers were grateful for their courage in exposing the chief's crimes, others still harbored fears about Mama Khali's power. The old suspicions of witchcraft had not entirely disappeared. Loreto noticed how some villagers avoided their gaze, whispering as they passed. Though the truth about the missing children had been revealed, and Chief Libua had been ousted, fear lingered in their hearts. Fear of the unknown, fear of power, and fear of change. Mama Libusin, as wise as ever, warned Loreto not to expect gratitude from everyone. People fear what they don't understand, she said softly, as they sat under the shade of a baobab tree one afternoon. And fear is a powerful thing. It clouds judgment and turns friends into enemies. Loreto knew his mother was right. The chief's fall had opened old wounds, and healing would take time. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something darker still lingered in the village, something that hadn't been fully uncovered. And until they faced it, Lesotho would never truly be free from the shadows that haunted it. Despite Chief Libua's banishment, a strange energy continued to pulse through the village. The whispers of the ancestors seemed louder than ever, their presence almost palpable. One night, while Loreto was asleep, he had a vivid dream. In it, he stood before the great ancestors of Lesotho, their eyes glowing with otherworldly wisdom. They spoke to him in a language that he didn't fully understand, but their message was clear: the battle was not over. Loreto awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the ancestors were trying to tell him something, but he didn't know what. He rushed to find Mama Libusin, who had also been awake, her face thoughtful and tense. "They spoke to you too, didn't they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Loreto nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "They said something is coming, something we're not prepared for." Mama Libusin didn't seem surprised. "The ancestors have watched over us for generations," she said, her voice steady. "They guide us, but they also test us. If they are warning us now, it means we are facing a danger unlike any we have seen before." Together, they began to prepare for whatever was coming, knowing that their bond with their ancestors would be crucial in the fight ahead. With the chief gone, the remaining village elders tried to reassert their control, stepping in to fill the power vacuum left by Olowokoro's downfall. But the villagers were no longer as easily swayed by authority. The uprising had given them a new sense of empowerment, and many began to question the decisions of the elders, who had once ruled unquestioned. For the first time, the people of Lesotho were speaking out, demanding accountability and transparency. Loreto and Mama Libusin watched as the elders struggled to maintain their grip on power. But something about their behavior seemed off to Loreto. The elders seemed more nervous than usual, as if they were hiding something even bigger than the chief's crimes. Loreto's suspicions deepened when he overheard an argument between two elders late one evening. They were speaking in hushed tones, but Loreto caught the words "forbidden ritual" and "ancestral curse." His heart raced. He had thought that exposing Chief Libua would be the end of the village's troubles, but now it seemed that the elders themselves were involved in something far more sinister. He rushed to tell Mama Libusin, who listened carefully, her face growing dark with concern. "I fear this might be the case," she said quietly. "The elders have been guarding secrets older than we know. And now, those secrets are coming to light." The mention of the forbidden ritual troubled Mama Libusin deeply. She had studied many of the ancient rites and traditions of Lesotho, but there were certain practices that had been deliberately erased from history, practices so dangerous that they were considered taboo even by the most powerful of elders. Loreto wanted to know more, but Mama Libusin hesitated to speak of it. "There are some things," she said, "that are best left forgotten." But Loreto couldn't shake his curiosity. If the elders were involved in a forbidden ritual, it meant that the village was in greater danger than they had realized. He began to secretly investigate the matter, searching through old scrolls and speaking to the few villagers who remembered the old stories. Slowly, he pieced together fragments of the truth. Long ago, the elders had made a pact with dark forces in exchange for power. This pact was tied to the ancestral spirits, but it came with a terrible price, one that was about to be paid. When Loreto confronted Mama Libusin with what he had learned, she sighed heavily. "I had hoped this was just a legend," she admitted. "But it seems that the truth is even more dangerous than we imagined." The forbidden ritual was designed to bind the ancestors to the will of the elders, but in doing so, they disrupted the natural balance of power. Now, the spirits are restless, and their anger is growing. As the days passed, strange occurrences began to plague the village. Crops withered overnight, livestock grew sick, and a dark mist seemed to hover over Lesotho, blotting out the sun. The villagers grew more fearful by the day, and whispers of a curse spread like wildfire. Loreto knew that the forbidden ritual was at the heart of it all, and that the elders were responsible for the chaos that was unfolding. But what troubled him most was the behavior of the ancestral spirits. Once peaceful and protective, they had become vengeful, lashing out at the villagers indiscriminately. Loreto could feel their wrath every time the wind blew through the trees, their voices growing louder and more desperate. Mama Khali warned him that the spirits would not rest until the balance was restored. Desperate to protect the village, Loreto and his mother decided to confront the elders directly. They could no longer hide behind their lies and deceit. But when they arrived at the elders' council, they found something far worse than they had imagined. The elders had already begun the final stage of the forbidden ritual, hoping to regain control over their ancestors before it was too late. Loreto's heart sank as he realized they were playing with forces they could not possibly control. The battle to save the village had only just begun. The elders had chosen an ancient altar deep in the forest as the site for the final part of their ritual. It was a place long abandoned by the villagers, believed to be cursed by the ancestors themselves. Loreto and Mama Khali made their way through the thick undergrowth, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They could feel the spirits watching them, their presence growing stronger with each step. When they arrived at the clearing, they saw the elders gathered around the altar, chanting in a language older than Lesotho itself. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the ritual progressed. Loreto felt a wave of dread wash over him. He knew that if they didn't stop the elders now, the entire village would be consumed by the wrath of the ancestors. Mama Khali stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding as she called out to the spirits. "Enough," she shouted, her words cutting through the elders' chants like a blade. "You have desecrated the sacred bond between our people and their ancestors. This must end now." The elders hesitated, their eyes wide with fear as they realized that they had lost control of the ritual. The spirits were no longer responding to their commands, they had become a force of their own, and their fury was about to be unleashed. As Mama Khali's voice echoed through the forest, the winds picked up, swirling in violent circles around the ancient altar. The sky darkened, and the air itself seemed to hum with the anger of the ancestral spirits. The elders, frozen in terror, stood in the center of the altar, realizing that their power over the spirits had slipped from their grasp. Loreto felt a deep chill as he watched the scene unfold, knowing that whatever was about to happen would change everything. Suddenly, a voice thundered from the sky, a voice that seemed to come from the earth, the trees, and the spirits themselves. It was a voice of judgment, commanding, ancient, and merciless. "You have betrayed the sacred trust of the ancestors," the voice boomed. "You sought power for yourselves and disrupted the balance of the land. Now, you shall face the consequences." The earth trembled beneath their feet as the voice spoke. The elders fell to their knees, begging for mercy, but it was clear that their pleas would go unanswered. The ancestors had watched over Lesotho for centuries, and they would not tolerate this violation. In a sudden flash of light, the spirits descended upon the altar, their ethereal forms swelling like a storm. The air crackled with energy as the spirits encircled the elders, trapping them in a ring of shimmering light. Loreto watched in awe and horror as the spirits exacted their judgment. The elders' cries of fear grew louder, but the spirits showed no mercy. One by one, the elders collapsed, their life force drained by the very spirits they had sought to control. It was a harsh, but just punishment, an ancient form of justice that no mortal could interfere with. As the last of the elders fell, the forest grew quiet. The wind stilled, and the dark clouds began to part, allowing the first rays of sunlight to pierce through the gloom. The spirits, having exacted their vengeance, began to retreat into the trees, their glowing forms fading back into the earth. The balance had been restored. Mama Khali and Loreto stood in the clearing, watching as the spirits slowly disappeared. The weight of what they had just witnessed hung heavy in the air, but Loreto felt a strange sense of peace. The village was no longer under the control of the corrupt elders, and the spirits had made their judgment. It was over. Or so they thought. As they turned to leave, Mama Libusin placed a hand on Loreto's shoulder. "We have done what needed to be done," she said softly. "But this is not the end. The village will need time to heal, and we must ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated." Loreto nodded, knowing that she was right. The fight had been long and hard, but their work was far from finished. When they returned to the village, they found the people gathered in the square, anxiously awaiting news of what had transpired. As Mama Libusin explained the events, there was a mixture of relief and sorrow. The elders' betrayal had left deep scars, but with their downfall came the promise of a new beginning. The villagers, though shaken, were ready to rebuild. And with Loreto and Mama Libusin to guide them, they would do so with respect for the ancestors and the land that had sustained them for generations. In the weeks that followed, the village of Lesotho slowly began to recover. Without the oppressive rule of the elders, the villagers found a renewed sense of hope and freedom. Mama Libusin and Loreto played a central role in helping the people rebuild, ensuring that new leaders were chosen based on wisdom and integrity rather than power and greed. The ancestral spirits, once feared and misunderstood, were now honored in new ways. Loreto worked with Mama Libusin to restore the old traditions, teaching the younger generation the true meaning of the ancestors' protection and guidance. The spirits were no longer seen as something to be controlled or manipulated, but as guardians of the land and the people. The balance between the living and the spirit world had been restored, and with it, the village's prosperity. But even as the village flourished, Loreto couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. The battle with the elders had been won, but he knew that there were still deeper truths waiting to be uncovered. The ancestors' warning had been clear: the danger was not over. And as Loreto looked out over the horizon, he couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay ahead for him, his mother, and the village of Lesotho. One night, as Loreto sat by the fire, contemplating all that had happened, the ancestors spoke to him once more. Their voices were softer now, less urgent, but still filled with a sense of foreboding. "You have restored the balance," they said, "but the shadows of the past are not yet gone. Beware, for a new threat is rising. One that will test the very foundation of this land." Loreto's heart sank. After everything they had been through, the idea of facing yet another danger weighed heavily on him. But he also knew that the ancestors were never wrong. If they were warning him now, it meant that something far more dangerous than the elders was on the horizon. He shared the warning with Mama Libusin, who listened quietly. She had sensed it too, the same dark energy that had first signaled the elders' betrayal. "We must be vigilant," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The ancestors have given us a chance to rebuild, but we must protect what we have restored. The danger may come from within, or it may come from beyond our borders, but we will face it together." Loreto nodded, determined to protect his village and his people. The journey was far from over, but with the wisdom of his mother and the strength of the ancestors behind him, he knew they would be ready for whatever came next. One quiet afternoon, as the village of Lesotho was beginning to settle into its newfound peace, a stranger arrived at the village gates. His presence was unsettling. He was cloaked in dark robes, his face obscured by a hood, and his arrival was sudden, as if he had appeared out of thin air. Mama Libusin warned him that the spirits would not rest until the balance was restored. Desperate to protect the village, Loreto and his mother decided to confront the elders directly. They could no longer hide behind their lies and deceit. But when they arrived at the elders' council, they found something far worse than they had imagined. The elders had already begun the final stage of the forbidden ritual, hoping to regain control over the ancestors before it was too late. Loreto's heart sank as he realized they were playing with forces they could not possibly control. The battle to save the village had only just begun. The elders had chosen an ancient altar deep in the forest as the site for the final part of their ritual. It was a place long abandoned by the villagers, believed to be cursed by the ancestors themselves. Loreto and Mama Libusin made their way through the thick undergrowth, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They could feel the spirits watching them, their presence growing stronger with each step. When they arrived at the clearing, they saw the elders gathered around the altar, chanting in a language older than Lesotho itself. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the ritual progressed. Loreto felt a wave of dread wash over him. He knew that if they didn't stop the elders now, the entire village would be consumed by the wrath of the ancestors. Mama Khali stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding as she called out to the spirits. "Enough," she shouted, her words cutting through the elders' chants like a blade. "You have desecrated the sacred bond between our people and their ancestors. This must end now." The elders hesitated, their eyes wide with fear as they realized that they had lost control of the ritual. The spirits were no longer responding to their commands, they had become a force of their own, and their fury was about to be unleashed. As Mama Khali's voice echoed through the forest, the winds picked up, swirling in violent circles around the ancient altar. The sky darkened, and the air itself seemed to hum with the anger of the ancestral spirits. The elders, frozen in terror, stood in the center of the altar, realizing that their power over the spirits had slipped from their grasp. Loreto felt a deep chill as he watched the scene unfold, knowing that whatever was about to happen would change everything. Suddenly, a voice thundered from the sky, a voice that seemed to come from the earth, the trees, and the spirits themselves. It was a voice of judgment, commanding, ancient, and merciless. "You have betrayed the sacred trust of the ancestors," the voice boomed. "You sought power for yourselves and disrupted the balance of the land. Now, you shall face the consequences." The earth trembled beneath their feet as the voice spoke. The elders fell to their knees, begging for mercy, but it was clear that their pleas would go unanswered. The ancestors had watched over Lesotho for centuries, and they would not tolerate this violation. In a sudden flash of light, the spirits descended upon the altar, their ethereal forms swirling like a storm. The air crackled with energy as the spirits encircled the elders, trapping them in a ring of shimmering light. Loreto watched in awe and horror as the spirits exacted their judgment. The elders' cries of fear grew louder, but the spirits showed no mercy. One by one, the elders collapsed, their life force drained by the very spirits they had sought to control. It was a harsh, but just punishment, an ancient form of justice that no mortal could interfere with. As the last of the elders fell, the forest grew quiet. The wind stilled, and the dark clouds began to part, allowing the first rays of sunlight to pierce through the gloom. The spirits, having exacted their vengeance, began to retreat into the trees, their glowing forms fading back into the earth. The balance had been restored. Mama Khali and Loreto stood in the clearing, watching as the spirits slowly disappeared. The weight of what they had just witnessed hung heavy in the air, but Loreto felt a strange sense of peace. The village was no longer under the control of the corrupt elders, and the spirits had made their judgment. It was over. Or so they thought. As they turned to leave, Mama Khali placed a hand on Loreto's shoulder. "We have done what needed to be done," she said softly. "But this is not the end. The village will need time to heal, and we must ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated." Loreto nodded, knowing that she was right. The fight had been long and hard, but their work was far from finished. When they returned to the village, they found the people gathered in the square, anxiously awaiting news of what had transpired. As Mama Khali explained the events, there was a mixture of relief and sorrow. The elders' betrayal had left deep scars, but with their downfall came the promise of a new beginning. The villagers, though shaken, were ready to rebuild. And with Loreto and Mama Khali to guide them, they would do so with respect for the ancestors and the land that had sustained them for generations. In the weeks that followed, the village of Lesotho slowly began to recover. Without the oppressive rule of the elders, the villagers found a renewed sense of hope and freedom. Mama Khali and Loreto played a central role in helping the people rebuild, ensuring that new leaders were chosen based on wisdom and integrity rather than power and greed. The ancestral spirits, once feared and misunderstood, were now honored in new ways. Loreto worked with Mama Khali to restore the old traditions, teaching the younger generation the true meaning of the ancestors' protection and guidance. The spirits were no longer seen as something to be controlled or manipulated, but as guardians of the land and the people. The balance between the living and the spirit world had been restored, and with it, the village's prosperity. But even as the village flourished, Loreto couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. The battle with the elders had been won, but he knew that there were still deeper truths waiting to be uncovered. The ancestors' warning had been clear, the danger was not over. And as Loreto looked out over the horizon, he couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay ahead for him, his mother, and the village of Lesotho. One night, as Loreto sat by the fire, contemplating all that had happened, the ancestors spoke to him once more. Their voices were softer now, less urgent, but still filled with a sense of foreboding. "You have restored the balance," they said, "but the shadows of the past are not yet gone. Beware, for a new threat is rising. One that will test the very foundation of this land." Loreto's heart sank. After everything they had been through, the idea of facing yet another danger weighed heavily on him. But he also knew that the ancestors were never wrong. If they were warning him now, it meant that something far more dangerous than the elders was on the horizon. He shared the warning with Mama Khali, who listened quietly. She had sensed it too, the same dark energy that had first signaled the elders' betrayal. "We must be vigilant," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The ancestors have given us a chance to rebuild, but we must protect what we have restored. The danger may come from within, or it may come from beyond our borders, but we will face it together." Loreto nodded, determined to protect his village and his people. The journey was far from over, but with the wisdom of his mother and the strength of the ancestors behind him, he knew they would be ready for whatever came next. One quiet afternoon, as the village of Lesotho was beginning to settle into its newfound peace, a stranger arrived at the village gates. His presence was unsettling. He was cloaked in dark robes, his face obscured by a hood, and his arrival was sudden, as if he had appeared out of thin air. The villagers stopped what they were doing, eyes fixed on the mysterious figure as he slowly made his way toward the village square. Loreto, having been warned by the ancestors of a new threat, was on high alert. He could feel the stranger's energy before he even saw him, a cold, unsettling presence that seemed to chill the very air. Mama Khali, too, sensed something dark about this man. As she and Loreto approached, the stranger stopped and lifted his head, revealing piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through them. "I seek the one they call Loreto," the man said, his voice low but commanding. "The son of the witch?" Loreto stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I am Loreto," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What business do you have here?" The stranger's lips curled into a faint smile. "I bring a message," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "The past you think you've buried is far from dead. There are forces at work that you cannot comprehend, forces that will soon rise to claim what is theirs. You have no idea what is coming." With that, the stranger turned and began to walk away, leaving behind a palpable tension in the air. Loreto wanted to stop him, to demand answers, but something in the man's presence held him back. Mama Khali placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression grim. "The ancestors' warning," she whispered. "It begins." That night, Loreto lay awake, the stranger's words echoing in his mind. What had he meant by forces beyond his comprehension? And why had he called Mama Khali a witch with such disdain? There was no doubt that the man was connected to the dark energy the ancestors had warned about, but the full extent of the threat remained unclear. As Loreto tossed and turned, a sudden gust of wind howled through the village, rattling the doors and windows. The sky, once clear and starry, became overcast with ominous clouds. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and the air grew thick with the scent of rain. Mama Khali, sensing the shift, rushed outside, and Loreto followed closely behind her. In the center of the village, a massive tree stood, a sacred tree that the villagers believed was a bridge between their world and the spirit realm. Now, the tree was shaking violently, its branches swaying as though caught in a storm. But there was no storm. Only the tree, trembling, as if trying to convey a message from the ancestors. Suddenly, the ground at the base of the tree cracked open, and from the earth rose a single object, a black, twisted staff with strange markings etched into it. Loreto recognized the symbols immediately. They were ancient, dark magic. The staff was a powerful tool, one used by sorcerers who sought to manipulate the spirit world for their own gain. "This is a sign," Mama Khali whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The dark forces the stranger spoke of, they are connected to this staff. Someone seeks to wield it, to gain control over the spirits. Loreto's heart raced. He knew what this meant. Whoever owned the staff had the power to control the very forces that had once protected their village. And if the wrong hands got hold of it, the balance they had fought so hard to restore would be shattered. The next morning, Loreto and Mama Khali called an emergency meeting with the village council. They explained the arrival of the stranger, the appearance of the staff, and the warning from the ancestors.
But not everyone was convinced. "We've just rid ourselves of the corrupt elders," one council member said, his voice skeptical. "Now you're telling us that some dark magic is threatening the village again. How do we know this isn't just more fear-mongering?" Another council member, a respected elder named Mzamo, spoke up in support of Loreto. "We cannot ignore the signs," he said firmly. "The ancestors have warned us, and the staff is proof. If we do nothing, we risk losing everything we've worked to rebuild." But the council was divided. Some believed in the danger Loreto described, while others were hesitant to act without more evidence. The scars from the previous conflict were still fresh, and many were wary of being drawn into yet another battle. As the council argued, Loreto felt a growing frustration. Time was running out, and they couldn't afford to wait until the threat materialized. He turned to Mama Khali, who nodded in silent agreement. "We'll have to act on our own," she said quietly. "We can't wait for the council to make a decision. The danger is too real." Realizing that they couldn't face this new threat alone, Loreto and Mama Khali set out to find allies. They needed others who understood the power of the staff and who could help them protect the village from those who sought to wield it. Their first stop was the neighboring village of Nkosana, where an old friend of Mama Khali's lived, a powerful shaman named Zanil, known for her deep connection to the spirit world. Zanil had once been part of the same circle of wisdom keepers as Mama Khali, but their paths had diverged after a disagreement over how to use their powers. As they approached Zanil's home, they found her sitting outside, tending to a fire. She looked up as they arrived, her expression unreadable. "It's been a long time, Khali," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "What brings you here now?" Mama Khali didn't waste time with pleasantries. She explained the situation, the stranger, the staff, and the looming danger. Zanil listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as she took in the details. "I knew this day would come," Zanil said finally, her voice laced with regret. "The staff is older than any of us. It was buried for a reason, to keep its power from being used by those who would abuse it. But now that it's been unearthed, the balance of the spirit world is in grave danger." Loreto could sense that Zanil was holding something back, something she wasn't ready to reveal. But for now, they needed her help. "Will you join us?" he asked. Zanil hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes. But you must know, this battle will not be easy. The forces you're dealing with are ancient and powerful. And there is more to this story than you realize." As they prepared to return to Lesotho, Loreto couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was only just beginning, and that the secrets of the staff were more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Back in Lesotho, the village had returned to its usual rhythm, but an undercurrent of unease lingered. The villagers could sense that something dark was on the horizon, though most chose to ignore it. Loreto, Mama Khali, and their new ally, Zanil, knew they couldn't afford that luxury. The staff's appearance was no mere coincidence, and its dark power was growing by the day. In the privacy of Mama Khali's home, Zanil studied the ancient staff carefully, her fingers tracing the sinister symbols carved into its surface. "This staff was forged by a powerful sorcerer centuries ago," Zanil explained. "It was used to control the spirits, bending them to the sorcerer's will. But that kind of power comes at a cost. It disrupts the natural balance between the living and the dead, causing chaos in both worlds. Loreto shuddered at the thought of anyone having that kind of control. Who would want to wield such a dangerous power? He asked. Zeniel exchanged a glance with Mama Lebusin. There are those who crave power at any cost, she replied. And there are forces, dark ones, that seek to return. Whoever seeks this staff intends to unleash those forces. As they spoke, a strange energy filled the air, as if the staff itself were listening. Zeniel's face darkened. There's something else, she said quietly. The staff isn't just a tool for controlling spirits. It has a consciousness of its own, a will. Whoever wields it risks becoming consumed by its power. If the wrong person takes control, they won't just command the spirits, they'll become a puppet for the dark forces bound to the staff. Loreto felt a growing sense of dread. The ancestors' warning now made perfect sense. This wasn't just about protecting the village, it was about stopping an ancient evil from returning. With this new knowledge, Loreto, Mama Lebusin, and Zeniel knew they had to act quickly. They couldn't wait for the danger to come to them, they had to find the source of the threat and destroy the staff before it could be used. But finding their enemy wouldn't be easy. Whoever saw the staff had already proven to be elusive and powerful. The stranger who had appeared in the village had given no clues as to his identity or his true purpose, and there were no other obvious suspects. That evening, as they gathered around the fire to discuss their next move, Mama Lebusin suggested they consult the spirits directly. We've done all we can with the knowledge we have, she said. But the spirits may be able to guide us to the one who seeks the staff. Zeniel nodded in agreement. It's risky, she said. But it may be our only option. Loreto felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He had never been comfortable communicating with the spirits, it was a realm he didn't fully understand, one that Mama Lebusin had always been more attuned to. But he trusted her judgment and knew that the ancestors had been guiding them this far. That night, under the full moon, they gathered at the sacred tree, the same place where the staff had emerged. Mama Lebusin led the ritual, her voice low and steady as she called upon the spirits for guidance. The air grew thick with the presence of the ancestors, their energy swirling around them like a warm breeze. After a long silence, the spirits finally responded. Loreto felt their presence like a whisper in his mind, urging him to listen closely. The one you seek is not far, the spirit said, their voices echoing in the wind. He hides in the shadows, biding his time. But he is close, watching, waiting for his moment to strike. A shiver ran down Loreto's spine. The enemy was closer than they had realized. The next day, the village seemed eerily calm, but Loreto's senses were heightened. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face, seemed like a potential threat. The spirits had confirmed what they feared. The enemy was not an outsider but someone among them, someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Loreto and Mama Lebusin decided to quietly investigate the villagers, looking for any signs of strange behavior or unexplained absences. They couldn't risk alarming everyone, so they kept their investigation secret, sharing their suspicions only with Zeniel. As they moved through the village, Loreto began to notice subtle signs of something amiss. A group of young men, usually friendly and open, had become distant, their eyes darting nervously whenever he or Mama Lebusin approached. A merchant who regularly traveled to neighboring villages had suddenly stopped leaving town, claiming his business was suffering. And there were whispered conversations between some of the elders, who had once been loyal to the corrupt leaders. One evening, as Loreto was returning from the market, he spotted a figure slipping into the forest at the edge of the village. His heart raced. Could this be the enemy they were looking for? He followed at a distance, careful not to make a sound, and soon found himself deep in the woods, where the trees grew thick and the lights from the village disappeared.
Loreto had grown up in the heart of Lesotho, a village wrapped in the deep traditions and customs of their ancestors. Life in the village was slow-paced, and everyone knew each other's stories. Or at least, they thought they did. For as long as he could remember, Loreto had heard whispers about his mother, Mama Khali. They said she wasn't just an ordinary woman. Some said she had powers, others said she was dangerous. But Loreto had always shrugged it off, thinking it was nothing more than village gossip. After all, what son would believe his mother, the same woman who raised him with love and care, could be a witch? But recently, the whispers had grown louder. Every time something strange happened in the village, whether it was the crops dying unexpectedly or someone falling ill, people started to look in Mama Khali's direction. Loreto had noticed the sideways glances, the way the elders murmured to one another when she passed. The villagers were afraid, but Loreto didn't understand why. His mother was quiet, hardworking, and had never hurt anyone, at least not that he knew of. Yet, the air was thick with suspicion, and it was only a matter of time before something more than whispers would come knocking at their door. As Loreto grew older, he began to notice things about Mama Khali that, in retrospect, seemed out of the ordinary. She always knew when he was in trouble, even when he hadn't told her. As a child, he would climb trees he wasn't supposed to, or venture into the forbidden parts of the forest. No matter how far away he was, his mother would always appear at just the right time to bring him back home, safe and sound. When he asked how she knew, she would smile mysteriously and say, "A mother always knows." But it wasn't just her instincts that stood out. Mama Khali had a way with nature. Their small farm always seemed to flourish even when the rest of the village struggled. Crops that failed for others thrived under her care. Animals that had fallen ill were brought back to health after spending just a few days under her watchful eye. Loreto hadn't thought much of it at first, but now, in light of the rumors, he wondered. Could it be that Mama Khali had powers? And if she did, what did that mean for him? Was his mother really who he thought she was, or was there more to her than he could understand? It was on a full moon night that Loreto's world shifted. He had woken up to the sound of footsteps outside their home. Groggy and confused, he peeked out the window and saw his mother, dressed in her finest wrap, walking swiftly toward the forest. Something about her movement was different, deliberate, almost urgent. Curiosity got the better of him, and he followed her quietly, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen. As he crept through the tall grass, he noticed several other women walking in the same direction, all converging toward the heart of the forest. The deeper they went, the more nervous Loreto became. Finally, they arrived at a clearing, illuminated by the silver glow of the moon. To his shock, he saw his mother and the other women standing in a circle, murmuring words in a language he didn't recognize. At the center of the circle was a small fire, its flames crackling softly. As Loreto crouched behind a tree, watching in disbelief, he realized that this was no ordinary gathering. It was something ancient, something powerful. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Was this the witchcraft the villagers whispered about? And if so, what was his mother's role in it? The next morning, Loreto couldn't shake the images from the night before. He felt unsettled, unsure of what he had witnessed. In search of answers, he made his way to the home of Baba Molo, the village healer. Baba Molo was known for his wisdom and deep connection to the spiritual world. People came from far and wide to seek his guidance, and Loreto hoped he could shed some light on the strange events he had witnessed. When Loreto arrived, he found Baba Molo sitting under a large baobab tree, grinding herbs with his wrinkled hands. Loreto hesitated before speaking. "Baba, I have seen something strange," he began. He described the midnight gathering in as much detail as he could remember, leaving nothing out. Baba Molo listened intently, his face expressionless. When Loreto finished, the old man let out a long sigh. "There are forces in this world that we cannot always understand, my child," he said. "Your mother may be connected to something far greater than you realize. But be careful. Not all power is evil, and not all who possess it are witches. Sometimes, power is a gift, meant to protect, not harm." Loreto left the healer's home with more questions than answers, unsure of what path to take next. The village of Lesotho had always been steeped in legends, and one of the most enduring was the tale of the witches. According to the elders, long ago, there was a powerful clan of women who could command the forces of nature. They were neither good nor evil, but their power made them feared by all. The villagers believed that these women were chosen by the ancestors, blessed with abilities to protect the land from invaders and other threats. However, over time, their power became a source of fear and jealousy, leading to their eventual persecution. The more Loreto learned about these legends, the more he wondered if his mother was connected to them. Was she one of these women, chosen by the ancestors to carry on their legacy? The thought both excited and terrified him. If it were true, what did that mean for him? Could he, too, possess some of this power? And if so, was it a blessing or a curse? As he wrestled with these questions, Loreto began to notice a change in the way the villagers looked at him. It was as if they could sense that he was different, that his mother's blood ran through his veins. The once friendly smiles now turned into wary glances, and Loreto realized that his life would never be the same again. Tensions in the village reached a boiling point when children began to go missing. It started with whispers, rumors that quickly spread like wildfire. A child would go to the river to fetch water and never return. Another would be playing near the edge of the forest and disappear without a trace. Fear gripped the village, and soon all eyes turned toward Mama Khali. People began to mutter that it was her magic, her witchcraft, that had brought this curse upon them. The village was in turmoil, and no one felt safe. Loreto was heartbroken to see the way people now treated his mother. She had done nothing wrong, yet the fear in the village was palpable. It didn't help that the missing children's families were desperate for answers, and with no one else to blame, Mama Khali became the target of their rage. Loreto tried to defend her, but it seemed that nothing he said could change their minds. His once peaceful village had turned into a place of suspicion and paranoia, and Loreto knew that if something wasn't done soon, things would only get worse. The figure stopped at a small clearing, where a group of men had gathered around a fire. Loreto crept closer, hiding behind a tree, and listened. The men were speaking in hushed tones, but he could make out enough to understand. They found the staff, one of the men said, his voice tense. We need to move faster. If they destroy it, all our work will be for nothing. Loreto's heart pounded. These were the ones plotting against the village, the ones who sought to use the staff for their own gain. But who was leading them? Before he could find out, one of the men glanced in his direction, and Loreto knew he had been spotted. Without thinking, he turned and ran, the sound of footsteps close behind him. The men were chasing him, and if they caught him, there would be no escape. Loreto sprinted through the forest, his breath coming in short gasps as he darted between the trees. The footsteps behind him were getting louder, the men closing in. His mind raced, he had to get back to the village, to warn Mama Khali and Zanil. But with the men so close, it seemed impossible. As he ran, he spotted a narrow path leading off the main trail. Without hesitating, he veered onto it, hoping it would give him the advantage he needed. The path was overgrown and difficult to navigate, but it led him deeper into the woods, away from the open trails where his pursuers had the upper hand. For what felt like hours, Loreto ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He could still hear the men behind him, but their voices were growing fainter. Finally, he reached a small stream and collapsed beside it, gasping for air. He had escaped, for now. But Loreto knew that his discovery had put them all in danger. The enemy was organized, and they were much closer to unleashing the power of the staff than he had imagined. He couldn't afford to rest. As soon as he had caught his breath, he stood up and began making his way back to the village. By the time Loreto returned, it was nearly dawn. He rushed to Mama Khali's home, where Zanil was already waiting, her expression grim. They know we are onto them, Loreto said breathlessly. We have to act now, before they make their move. Mama Khali nodded, her face set in determination. We will gather the allies we have and confront them, she said. This ends tonight. As dawn broke, Mama Khali, Loreto, and Zanil wasted no time. They quietly rallied those they could trust within the village, men and women who had remained loyal to their customs and the spirits of their ancestors. Each ally had a role to play in what would be the final confrontation. We don't have much time, Mama Khali said. They'll make their move soon, and we need to be ready. Loreto watched as their small group gathered in the village square, a mix of warriors, hunters, and spiritual guides. Though their numbers were few, their determination was clear. These were people who understood the danger of the dark power seeking to corrupt their land. And they trusted Mama Khali's leadership. Zanio took charge of preparing a protective ritual. She gathered sacred herbs, carved symbols into the earth, and called upon the spirits to shield them from the staff's power. As the night approached, the air grew heavy with anticipation, and the village seemed to hold its breath. We'll confront them in the forest, where they've been gathering, Loreto said. But we have to destroy the staff before they can use it. Mama Khali nodded, her face grim. The spirits will guide us. Under the cover of darkness, Loreto, Mama Khali, Zanio, and their small band of allies moved toward the forest, where the enemy lay in wait. As they neared the clearing where Loreto had earlier seen the conspirators, they could see the flicker of firelight and hear the low murmur of voices. They are preparing, Zanio whispered. We must strike before they complete whatever ritual they are attempting. As they drew closer, they saw the men gathered around the ancient staff, now glowing with a faint, eerie light. The stranger, whom they had first encountered in the village, stood at the center, holding the staff aloft. His face was twisted with the desire for power, and he chanted in an ancient language, summoning forces from beyond. Before Loreto and the others could act, the stranger spotted them. His eyes gleamed with malice. You're too late, he sneered. The power of the spirits will bend to my will. I will control both life and death. With a sudden movement, he slammed the staff into the ground, sending a shockwave of dark energy through the clearing. The ground trembled, and the trees groaned under the weight of the unnatural force being unleashed. But Zanio was ready. She stepped forward, chanting a counterspell that Mama Khali had taught her. The air around them shifted, and the dark energy faltered as the protective ritual took hold. We can still stop him, Zanio shouted. Loreto rushed forward, determined to get to the staff. But the stranger's followers, loyal to their leader, blocked his path. A fierce battle broke out in the clearing, with Loreto, Mama Khali, and their allies fighting against the men who sought to unleash chaos upon the village. In the chaos, Loreto spotted the stranger raising the staff again, preparing to strike a final blow that would break the barrier between the living and the dead. Summoning all his strength, Loreto charged toward him, dodging blows and barely avoiding the dark energy swirling around the staff. At the last moment, Loreto reached the stranger and wrestled the staff from his hands. For a brief moment, the staff's power surged through him, its darkness threatening to overwhelm his senses. But Loreto thought of his mother, of the spirits, and of the village he had sworn to protect. With a final act of will, he lifted the staff and smashed it against a rock, shattering it into pieces. As the staff broke, a powerful gust of wind swept through the forest, and the dark energy that had filled the air dissipated. The men who had been fighting for control of the staff fell to their knees, their strength and were drained by the broken connection to the dark power. The ground stopped trembling, and the unnatural stillness that had pervaded the night lifted. Slowly, the spirits that had been bound by the staff's magic began to emerge. But instead of being hostile or wrathful, they were calm, grateful to be free from the influence of the dark forces that had sought to control them. Mama Khali stepped forward, her eyes closed, communing with their ancestors. She felt their approval, the acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to protect the village from ruin. Zanio, too, felt the presence of the spirits, a wave of peace washing over her. Loreto, exhausted but triumphant, looked around at the clearing. The village was safe. The staff, and the evil it had represented, was no more. Thank you, he whispered, directing his words toward the ancestors. We couldn't have done it without you. In the days that followed, life in the village slowly returned to normal. The dark threat had passed, and with the destruction of the staff, the balance between the living and the spirits had been restored. Loreto, Mama Khali, and Zanio were hailed as heroes, not just for saving the village, but for protecting the sacred bond that had always existed between their people and the spirit world. The elders, once blinded by their own greed, had been humbled by the events and vowed to honor the old ways, knowing that their ancestors were watching. Zenil, having proven herself as a spiritual leader in her own right, decided to stay in the village, learning from Mama Lebusin and deepening her connection to the spirits. Together, they would ensure that the knowledge of the ancestors would be passed down to future generations.